Welcome to Genuine Humans, exploring the stories behind the great marketing leaders of our time and hearing how their journeys have influenced the brands they've built. Brought to you by The Social Element, here are our hosts, Tamara Littleton, CEO and founder, and Wendy Christie, Chief People Officer.
Welcome to Genuine Humans podcast. And Wendy, my co-host, is here. And Wendy, you've just got back from holiday. How was it?
It was so lovely. We had a week in Lisbon, followed by a week on the Silver Coast in Portugal. So it was like having two holidays. So I'm feeling very refreshed and relaxed and happy to be back.
Fabulous. Well, we had a heat wave while you were off. So
it was cooler where I was.
But it was also, this is going to be like a little segue to our guest, but because it was the heat wave, I felt like it was a very good reason for me to eat lots and lots of Little Moons from the freezer. And I'm delighted that we are being joined today by Ross Farquhar, the marketing director at Little Moons. So welcome, Ross.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here and delighted that you were enjoying our products for the last couple of weeks. It's music to my ears.
I can't quite decide if I like the strawberry and cream or I think it's mango and passion fruit. But so I'm now doing A/B testing on both at the same time.
Please do. Please do. I'd also recommend pistachio. I am team pistachio to the end.
Lovely. So I'd love to hear more about what you're doing at Little Moons, but I'm going to start a little bit further back because what I would love to find out is how do you get to where you are now? So would you mind taking us through the sort of story of your early career?
Of course. So always so privileged to be able to talk about this. I hope it is useful to some people. So I started my career about 17 years ago. I started at Cadbury on their graduate program back when Cadbury still existed as a company. And I started there because I finished uni or was coming up to finishing uni. And honestly, my criteria for who to apply for were companies that I thought my mum would know and be proud of me for working at, which I suppose is a sort of weird proxy for being attracted to consumer brands in a way, because obviously you don't tend to go into B2B businesses when that's your proxy. And I guess it was kind of, I was drawn to the Diageos and Unilevers and P&Gs and ultimately Cadburys of this world. And is so often the case, I didn't realise at the time, but now with hindsight, how special a business Cadbury was and how lucky I was to have landed there. You know, it is was one of the most values-led businesses, probably because of its Quaker roots. And it really gave me an incredible grounding in sort of business done right for all rather than profit at all costs. So really, really privileged to work there for 6 or 7 years until the Kraft takeover happened. Very famously, and I'm sure most people listening will have been aware of that happening in sort of early 2010s. First of two takeovers I've been involved in my career, and my main lesson coming out of them, both actually, is you just need to work out very quickly whether you're on the bus or off the bus, because if you're off the bus but you pretend you're on the bus, you end up being quite toxic to everyone around you and to yourself actually, and you become quite miserable. And I sort of worked out pretty quickly actually that absolutely no offense to Kraft and what would go on to be Mondelez, but I had a whole lot of emotion wrapped up in Cadbury, a real love for it, and I was going to find it very difficult to move past that into the new thing. So it wasn't going to be particularly helpful for both parties, and I decided to move on, and was very lucky to get a job at Diageo, a business that I'd always wanted to work for as well, and I'd seen lots of people going between the two, so it felt like they were kind of sympathetic to one another in terms of being values led, but also seeing brands as a real driver of business. And I have no doubt that I would have stayed there for many, many years had I not been offered an incredible sort of once in a lifetime opportunity very early days into my career there. So I was actually approached about joining a startup agency called 101 that was being founded by the ex-founders of Fallon, who were the agency that made Cadbury Gorilla and various other things, and my ex-marketing director at Cadbury, Phil Rumble. So he offered me a job at about the sort of 2-month point of my career at Diageo. And it was incredibly hard to say bye to Diageo at that point, because honestly, I couldn't believe that I would ever be leaving that business, but I'd only just got there and I really, really loved it. But I also quickly sort of worked out I would regret not taking that opportunity to join a startup agency with such incredible people for the rest of my life if I didn't do it. So I jumped, and I spent 7 wonderful years at 101. I got to work with so many hugely smart and interesting people, both within 101 and the clients that I got to work with, got exposure to all these different industries that I would never have gotten exposure to from the big sort of blue chip FMCG world that I was in. And then I went through the second takeover of my life that I mentioned when 101 was absorbed into Mullen Group. And again, nothing but positive things to say about Mullen Group. And in fact, they're one of my agency partners now. But but again, I just worked out it wasn't quite right for me as a next chapter. So off the bus I went, and went on to join Grey London. To be honest, more as a test for myself to work out whether I sort of suspected I couldn't, but could I thrive in a big holding company agency model? And although I was only there for about a year, it was one of the most clarifying experiences of the kind of environments I thrive in, and I really enjoy and I'm at my best at. And ultimately, it's all part of the journey, so there's no regrets there. But after about a year, I left to go and start a career with another incredible organization. I went to be CMO of Wagamama, which is a really, really special business, completely different category to anything I'd done before. Hospitality is fundamentally different than being a marketer in FMCG. You quickly realize that the work that you do to motivate the thousands of people delivering service day in, day out, whether it's the chefs or the front of house team, is so much more material to whether you'll succeed or fail than the adverts you make or the placemats that you design. So that was brilliant. But ultimately, the pandemic hit. And at that point, all restaurant businesses were facing an existential crisis. And sadly, Wagamama made the decision that I completely agree with them on, which was they couldn't really afford a decently paid CMO, employed to look at the 18-month plus time horizon when they're fighting for their lives in the next 2 months. So I was let go from there, but I quickly, I got the first 6 months of lockdown life in gardening leave, which was a thoroughly odd experience. And then I joined Little Moons from there, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but an incredible business and one I'm delighted to be at now.
I feel like we're kind of professionally stalking you, actually, because we work with Mondelez Diageo, have worked with Wagamamas at one point. And
there you go. Well, I'm delighted about that. They're all brilliant businesses. I do like to think there's a thread. Like, I'm often told that my career is slightly all over the place, and I think it is just because I really like variety, and I get sometimes a little bit bored and so on. So I love going and doing things that are fundamentally quite different. But there is a thread to them all. Like, they're all really good values-led businesses that really care about their people and their heart's in the right place. But they're at the same time they're quite commercially sharp, and so on. I kind of love businesses with that blend.
I'd love to pick at that thread a little bit and maybe broaden the context even more. I was fascinated by what you said about your first job choice and thinking about it being a brand that your mum would know and be proud of you for working at. So can we go back a little bit even further and talk about your environment and experiences as a kid? What were you like as a kid?
I was thinking about this earlier. I think I was quite a confusing child, if I'm really honest, because on the one hand, I was quite theatrical and I loved creative stuff. But on the other, I was very studious and actually quite introverted. And, my parents were both very keen that I do well academically. They are the sort of hardworking people who absolutely were like, success is getting a job for life and staying there forever,
Right.
ideally in a profession that will see you with that sort of security. So, lawyers and doctors and accountants and that kind of thing. And I remember it starting at a really early age. Like, my mum would read to me and then read with me every single night in an effort to make sure that my literacy was ahead of time and all that kind of thing. So I don't know. I think that it was kind of an early sign for the kind of person that I am now. Because when I think about my own makeup, I think I'm an interesting blend of rigor and instinct, and I'm not weak nor incredibly spiky on either. Like, I really value rigor and detail and doing the thinking and studying the evidence. But I also think there's so much room for listening to your guts and just trying to be like a consumer, not just a sort of trained marketer. And it's really hard to find that balance, but I think it's really important to try. And I think that's sort of reflected in what I was like as a kid, sort of trying to manage this tension between a desire for creative output, but also a desire to get good grades in the academics and all that kind of thing.
I suppose it's just making sure that your gut is well informed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's huge value in experience and all that kind of thing, but also that having an open mind to the possibility that you're you might have been informed by stuff that may or may not be relevant to that situation. What I found when I was agency side in particular is you would find people who had spent their entire careers either in one business or one category were really shaped by the assumptions that are prevalent in that category. Whereas the people who had jumped around a little bit were, I don't want to say it's better or worse, they were just a bit more rounded because they'd seen different things work in different situations. And I always found that quite aspirational. It's another reason why I've jumped around a little bit, because I sort of often bring things in from my Wagamama days to inform what we're doing at Little Moons, even though they're fundamentally different categories. And I've definitely found times when, I've worked on loyalty points and pensions and furniture retail. And there are things from all of those things from my agency side time that I can apply in any walk of life that I go to next. So it also helps you to keep an open mind, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And who were the people that you looked up to when you were a child? It doesn't have to be someone you knew. It could be an author or an actor or a sports person.
So I think, honestly, the answer to that is I vividly remember looking up to my grandma when I was a kid, and mainly because she was such a beacon of kindness and generosity. She passed away when I was about 9, but I still have so many memories firmly rooted in my brain of her, despite her passing relatively early in my life. And I think it's why being kind is really hardwired into me. As a grown up, I'm constantly faced with challenging conversations and difficult situations to manage. But I really do try my best to start with kindness in every situation and go from there. And it's probably also why I find it quite difficult when I see people behaving in a way that isn't commensurate with that. I find it quite difficult to sort of compute that. So yeah, my grandmother was a really big influence in that case. She'd always put herself out for anyone at any asking, and always put other people first and that kind of thing. And I do think it kind of gave me a good sort of compass, I guess, for how to navigate the world.
Oh, that's lovely. And yes, I totally hear what you're saying about the kindness thing. I think whatever situation you're in or you're dealing with, I think it'll never steer you wrong.
No, absolutely. I just think there's so many, the commercial world in particular is a really difficult place sometimes. And, the most obvious example, I've had to make people redundant. I've had to let people go. I myself have been made redundant in my career. So I got it from the other side. Really tough, and there's loads of really emotional situations, and it can be really hard to navigate those things. But I do tend to think if you start with kindness, it doesn't mean that it won't be painful at that moment and all that kind of thing, but in the long run, if you can look back and go, everyone was well treated in that situation, you were fair and honest and considerate, then things tend to play out reasonably well in the medium to long term.
It's a good North Star, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Was there a childhood dream? And if so, what was it?
Yeah, maybe coming back to that original point about sort of that tension between creativity and rigor. My childhood dream was probably to be a WWE wrestler, or a WWF as it was, showing my age.
Yeah.
And that probably is the more theatrical bit of me coming out, because I used to be obsessed with Bret the Hitman Hart. I remember bursting into tears when my mum and dad told me that the tickets we had bought for WWF one weekend, because it was coming to Glasgow and we were travelling through, somehow we'd bought tickets for the night that Bret the Hitman Hart was not performing. And that was the end of the world to me. Childhood trauma, PTSD still to this day. So I was obsessed with that. But then on the rigor bit, as I grew up a bit, I always wanted to be a lawyer. And honestly, that is probably the most dull dream you're ever going to hear on this podcast. Absolutely no offense to lawyers. I have many friends who are lawyers, and sometimes they're the funniest people you could ever hope to meet. Though I do think there's something slightly weird about dreaming of becoming a lawyer. And I suspect, if I'm really honest with myself, that was probably more about me wanting to fulfill the expectations that I felt were on me, rather than any real personal desire to immerse myself in the world of law, which is for good and for bad. Like, I don't think expectations are necessarily a universally bad thing. They've certainly given me a degree of drive, but at the same time, too much expectation can be a burden as well. So it's a tricky balance.
So where do you think that expectation came from? What was it that your parents did?
So my mom worked for the civil service for many years, but she gave up work to look after me after my grandmother passed away. My dad largely worked in operational and HR roles for British Telecom, eventually BT, and then left to become a consultant himself. But he was, someone who worked away a lot, worked very, very hard. He put in a lot of effort to get me into, because I went to state schools, but he was all over getting me into state schools outside of my catchment area that had the best reputation and all that kind of thing. I'm an only child, so there is a certain element of, with love of my parents seeing it as a real focus to give me every possible opportunity. It's also the first person in my family to go to university, so that was slightly different. I'm so grateful for all of that, because I think they genuinely all just wanted me to have the best possible life and better. So it is all meant with complete kindness, while at the same time, of course, there are some downsides to all of that expectation. At times it can feel a little bit intense, but overall I'm very, very grateful for the hard work ethic that it gave me,
Yeah.
and the drive that I think sustained me for quite a long time.
You mentioned Phil before. Who are some of the other people that you've worked with over the years who've really influenced your career or your life in general?
So I will talk about Phil. I'm going to talk about two to that one, but I should say with a caveat up front. Of course, the answer to this is there is an endless list of people who've been so influential and so special to me over the career. I mean, basically anyone who I worked with at Cadbury, I've now come to realise what a special bunch of people, and I'm so grateful to having had the exposure to them. The same at pretty much every other business that I've been in. I've been incredibly fortunate. Phil is a really important person in my career. So Phil Rumball, for those who aren't familiar with him, he was the marketing director of Cadbury. Before that, he was the marketing director of InBev. And at Cadbury, he was my boss's boss. So if you can imagine, relatively junior, and he was leading the whole function. He went on to be the person to hire me into 101. And again, he was the person who recommended me to Emma Woods, the CEO of Wagamama, where I got that role. So he genuinely has been very instrumental to me in my career. He's been my biggest backer. And even though there have been plenty of occasions where we've driven each other nuts professionally, I mean, there was a time at 101 when we were kind of living in each other's pockets, working so closely that it was almost inevitable that we'd be driving each other crazy. He has never stopped being in my corner. And I think it's because that point I made earlier about kindness, he's someone who really, really gets that. And to give you an example that always sticks with me, one of my early memories of working with Phil, I remember I was making my first telly ad at Cadbury, and for some reason, both my boss and my boss's boss were on holiday the week that the treatment came in and had to be signed off.
God.
So if you can picture the scene, like me, vaguely terrified junior brand manager who'd never made a telly ad before, who then had to schedule time with the busiest man in the company who never seemed to have time in his diary. So even just getting past his PA was a challenge. But once I'd got that time in the diary, I had to step into a one-to-one with this man to present a treatment, not really knowing what a treatment was. And so I got into this room with him. And before we even sat down, Phil just stopped and went, "Now, Ross, and before we get started, I asked this with no expectation or judgment, but has anyone ever explained to you, what a treatment is and where you're at in the process and what good client behavior looks like in this situation?" And I sort of humbly went, "No, I don't really know anything, sorry." But he was brilliant. He just sat down and then he explained before we even opened the page, just, this is what a treatment is. This is where we're at. These are the challenging things about it. This is what you're buying. This is all of that kind of stuff.
Wow.
So it was such an amazing learning moment from a man who had negative amounts of time and really could have just approached that as I just need to get in and out and either sign this off or give this guy 3 or 4 points to take away and feed back to the agency. But he actually took the time and helped me and supported me. So that's genuine kindness for someone who really didn't have the time to give it. And so he is someone who's been really important to me and continues to be. Actually, I'm really glad to still be in pretty close contact with Phil. And then the second person to talk about is Sherilyn Shackle, the founder of the Marketing Academy. And I know she's been on this podcast
She
before,
has.
so you know.
We're big fans of Sherilyn.
Yeah.
She's a force of nature, and she's special to me, firstly, because she took a punt on me to make me a scholar on the first year of the Marketing Academy scholarship, where no one was quite sure what this thing was, and I don't know where I was at in my career, but she was brilliant to me then. And then she's been really special to me ever since, because she's always been there when I've needed her or whenever I've needed advice. And hopefully I've managed to pay back some of that with, alumni commitments and supporting the academy wherever I can. But she's just the sort of person who you can pick up the phone to and talk to, and she'll make time for you. And she was very pivotal in making the decision to leave Diageo after only a couple of months. She was actually the person I remember calling from a very illustrious meeting room in Diageo's headquarters, going, Sherilyn, I don't know what to do. What should I do? And she was the one who said to me, just sounds like you can't pass up this opportunity, can you? It's just too good to miss. And she was right. So I feel very, very privileged to have her phone number in my phone and know that I could ring her, and she would happily give up her time to me. She's really quite special.
Yeah, as I said, she's such an inspirational woman. Now, you've talked about kindness being your North Star, and you've talked about the other people that have supported you. How would you describe your leadership style?
So I try to be kind, but I won't talk about that too much because we already have. I would like to think that I'm quite a low ego leader. I take very seriously the idea that great leadership is about being in service to the people that you lead. I rarely look for personal glory, or at least I hope I don't. I spend more time thinking about how I can set up the people on the teams that I'm responsible for their own and for the business's success. There's nothing that gives me more joy than seeing people I think are brilliant doing brilliant things and achieving brilliant outcomes. And I kind of trust that there's karma in the world, and that if I play some small part in enabling those people to do brilliant things, then good things will come to me as well. And that served me pretty well since then. And it was quite a big flip. I mean, I remember when I first managed my first person, and such a stressful thing, and I thought I was being judged, whether that person was going to succeed or not. And oh god, it was so difficult. And I actually have found just relaxing a little bit into it and seeing myself as someone who is really just there to help that person. And there's a limit to how much you can do. Ultimately, some people are going to thrive and some people aren't, and that's not entirely on you. But if you can set up the conditions for people to thrive and give them every opportunity to succeed, that's leadership done well. And then the other thing I'd say is I really subscribe to the notion of high challenge, high support. So what I mean by that is I really love having challenging conversations about content and substance and knotty problems, and working out how we're going to get from A to B when it's not entirely obvious how to do that, enabled by a collective sense that we're all in this together and that we all believe in each other. And if we ever have something negative to say about the content and what we're doing, in no way confers a negative judgment on the people or what have you. Like I really like those kind of cultures, and I try and build them wherever I am, because I think it really builds collective resilience, actually, when you're in a team that feels like you can have those tough conversations, but everyone walks away feeling like a stronger collective, actually, rather than it's created any divisions or barriers. And a lot of that is about having respect for each other and knowing that high challenge isn't just walking in and throwing shade on every idea that comes up and being the drain in the room or anything like that. It's having good behaviors around constructive build and that kind of thing that you all live up to each other for. I think is really, really important.
Yes, that I think we've talked about this before on the podcast about the importance of radical candor, and the importance of feedback and how it is a gift as well. If I could just pick up also about, because I know this is very much a shared value for us in terms of sort of authentic leadership, and the whole concept of, well, I suppose the importance in the industry of being out and proud. And I'd love it if you wouldn't mind sort of sharing why it matters to you and perhaps the impact it's had.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking me about this. I've never really talked about this anywhere else, why would a bit, but I was really keen to talk about it a little bit, because I came out relatively later in life. It was actually in my early 30s when I was at 101. And it was a hugely pivotal moment for me, not only personally, but professionally. And I suspect a lot of LGBTQ plus people in our industry might be able to relate to my experience, because it seems to be a fairly common experience amongst our community, or at least the people I talk to. Before I came out, and while I was working out who I really was, I was pretty relentless academically and professionally. I was so ambitious at school and then at uni. I judged myself really harshly if I wasn't getting top grades or I was in the top set. And then when I started my career at Cadbury, I was working long hours, and I was desperately trying to climb the ladder as quickly as I could. and career progression became my measure of success. And the reason I think that is quite common amongst LGBTQ plus people. And I don't for a moment suggest it's universal, so apologies if you're listening and you think that doesn't reflect me. I do know that. It's just something that seems to come up quite a lot in conversations I have. The reason I think it's quite common is when you know that you're different and you have reason to believe that life is going to be harder for you, if you stare directly at that difference and articulate it to other people, you compensate. If you think that people in life or wider society aren't going to see you positively when they know who you really are, you find ways other than that to demonstrate your worth. And mine was academic and professional. For other people, it might be through sports or art or whatever you've got a talent in. And you go hard, often in a way that makes you miserable, if I'm really honest about it. And when I finally came out, everything changed, because although it wasn't easy, and I'm not going to suggest that I had universally positive reactions, because it, as much as I do believe it gets better, there's often some little bumps in the road to get there. The weight that was taken off my shoulders gave me a much more balanced perspective on my professional life as well. I wasn't less driven. I was just able to focus my drive in a way that helped me to keep achieving without sacrificing a whole lot of my personal life, or making me a kind of irritatingly careerist person to my colleagues. I was just much more relaxed into it because I wasn't carrying this big secret around. And it also freed me up to really explore who I really was in a much more sort of open way. So to come back to your question about why being out and proud is really important to me now, when I was in the closet, there weren't many visible, successful queer leaders in my life. And it made me think that was a signal that being part of this community would hold me back if everyone knew. So I bottled it up for an unhealthy amount of time, if I'm honest. And the truth is, though, when I came out, everything did get better, actually, not just personally, but professionally as well. And I hope that being open about who I am in places like this podcast might just reach one or two other people wrestling with their identity maybe a few years earlier than me, and maybe just reassure them a little bit that it's not a binary choice between personal honesty and professional success, that the first will help the second happen. So yeah, go for it.
It's backed up by the stats that we know that, and I think I can only refer to it was a Vodafone survey that was done, and I think it was done perhaps in 2019, so it's still, it's quite old. But the fact that 48% of people feel uncomfortable coming out of the closet, or they go back into the closet when they start their first sort of big job. And I think it's really important to talk about it. And there are times where I sort of think, God, am I just going on and on about it too much? But actually, I don't think you can go on about it too much, because if, as you say, if it means that people can feel like that release, because there's a lot of effort that goes into hiding yourself, whether it's, hiding the pronouns you use, or you don't want to gender your partner, for example. There's a lot of mental effort that goes into being in the closet. So I guess if we can perhaps change the industry so that more people feel that they can be themselves, it will actually release that burden. And just think of all of that time they can spend on being creative, or being amazing leaders, or being great at work. So
absolutely, because it's exhausting, and like you end up going down one or two paths. Either you end up leading this double life for a period, if you're sort of living your life as an out person in your personal life, but professionally trying to avoid it being known by anyone. That's incredibly hard. Or in my experience, I just boxed it up and really didn't explore it in my personal life either. So I was sort of closing myself down to the reality of who I was, which was exhausting in a whole other different way. And I look at as quite a lot of wasted time. So it's just not something to be recommended for anyone. And I know exactly what you mean about, oh God, we're all just banging on about this a little bit too much. But look, the reality is, as an LGBTQ plus person, you have to come out multiple times a day, because the world and society tells you that you're a deviation from the norm. And so you're going to have to be the one to clarify that at any given time. There are lots of small ways in which you have to do that. And so I guess my guidance is actually, the quicker that you can sort of jump through that hoop, and it's really unfair that we have to jump through that hoop, but ultimately society dictates that we do, And the quicker you can start living as who you really are in all facets of your life. I know it's hard. I'm not suggesting that every work culture is going to be as accepting as another, but honestly, it will get better from doing that in a myriad of ways.
Yeah, I find it very useful being able to sort of mention my girlfriend kind of quite quickly in conversations, sort of out myself. I also have to out the fact that she's a lawyer as well, but she is one of the interesting lawyers. She's just going to kill me if I don't defend her on the podcast. So I want to come back to Little Moons, and I know that it went viral on TikTok. And I also know, because when we first met, we were at a conference and you were sort of talking about that. So it would be great if you could just go into a bit more detail about any aspect of that situation that you want to talk about, because I've seen you do like a massive talk on it. So we could have like a whole hour on just TikTok and Little Moons going viral. But perhaps if you could share some of the experience of that.
I'll give a little précis for what happened for anyone who's not familiar, and where Little Moons is now, and I'll sort of try and bring it back into some of the stuff I was talking about earlier. So for those who aren't familiar with Little Moons are mochi ice cream. So they are essentially these sort of little bite-sized balls of artisan gelato wrapped in a soft, sweet, sort of delicate rice dough.
Oh, my mouth's watering.
You have to try them, Wendy.
I have. No. You know where I discovered them? In my own freezer.
Oh, really? Who put them there?
My son and his girlfriend were living here at the time, and they were obsessed. So I quickly joined them.
TikTok audience.
Young people, particularly teenagers, are the Trojan horse that are getting us into freezers up and down the country. And I'm incredibly grateful for them. But artisan gelato wrapped in a soft, sweet dough. Mochi dough is a staple in Japan and in terms of culture. So it's but often filled with a red bean paste. So it's a kind of savory, sweet thing. Ice cream is a kind of westernized fusion of the two things. But they're sort of a thoroughly modern concoction. You know, I always think about it as, while every other category in the grocery aisle tends to have been innovating like crazy in the last 20 years to, frankly, steal each other's lunch and get into other occasions, launch new formats, launch new packs, all that kind of thing, ice cream has kind of been stuck. It's been stuck in, you know, if you want your ice cream in a tub or you want your ice cream on a stick, you're in luck. But beyond that, there is nothing else happening. And Little Moons have come along and basically pioneered this snacking category within ice cream that are bite-sized, portion controlled. Because they're portion controlled, they're calorie controlled, but they are incredibly high quality and delicious. So you're not compromising there. It's not a low calorie thing in that sense. So that's what they are. Business is actually about 10 years old, and what they were founded by founders Howard and Vivian Wong, brother and sister duo. So they'd been building this business over 10 years, and then the early part of last year, Little Moons went viral on TikTok, and didn't just go viral in a small way. We, over the course of about a month, got up to about 500 million views from an entirely organic thing that was consumer driven. Sales were up about 2,000%. They became this kind of must-get treat of the summer, where there was no product on the shelves because no one is set up to suddenly increase manufacture by 2,000% overnight. So we couldn't make enough of the things. So there were just gaps on the shelves everywhere. People were then filming themselves on TikTok, trying to find Little Moons, going from store to store in the middle of lockdown. So bearing in mind, the only place you could go was grocery shopping. So people were literally entertaining themselves, just trying to find Little Moons, going on the hunt from store to store, looking for them. And if they found them, filming themselves, eating them in their cars, and ideally rating them 10 out of 10. So we were kind of the original poster child of TikTok at a point when TikTok was really going out with a bang in the UK in particular. And it was this incredible perfect storm of lockdown conditions making everyone miserable and constraining what they could do, TikTok providing a big burst of entertainment, Little Moons this product that is inherently very playful and entertaining and visually distinctive and functionally different, so intriguing in of that itself. And then this kind of nice blend between TikTok is ultimately there to give you a little smile. At Little Moons, we talk about them giving you a little lift that sparks positivity. It's a really nice blend. That virality just absolutely caught on, and as a result, we're now pretty much everywhere. We're in every grocery multiple. We're in pretty much every store, and we added more value to the ice cream category than any other brand last year. We just won the Grocer's Food Brand of the Year, so it's been an incredible year for the business. Bringing it back to what I was talking about earlier, though, when I talked about my sort of personal blend of rigor and creativity and instinct. I think the TikTok thing is a really good example of that, because actually at the point when it happened, I was sort of in the depth of the rigor bit of me. You know, I'd been building a marketing plan that was rooted in a whole load of empirical evidence. I'd been doing my little roadshow around all of the various stakeholders to persuade everyone of the value of marketing investment, and that, you know, things like there's a ton of empirical evidence of the return it's going to give you, that often that return isn't just sales uplift, it's about price effects, or it's about insurance for heavy weather, or that kind of, you know, all of those sort of things that just made marketing look like a very sensible and robust business decision, like any other capital investment, frankly, that would be treated like that in a P&L. And then obviously you go viral, it is all kind of out the window, and suddenly like, well, I wasn't expecting that, but I'm going to take advantage of that as best I possibly can. But if we hadn't been leaning into TikTok at that point, and, you know, I had someone on my team who absolutely loved the platform, and she had complete autonomy to just be doing what she wanted, and she was just very good at it. So she was doing all the right stuff on TikTok, and we were well suited to it, and it all kicked off. And I'm so grateful for that. But then equally, I'm so grateful that we've done all the legwork to make everyone believe in marketing, because it could have been so easy after that for the business to turn around to me and go, why would I need to spend millions of pounds on marketing when you can just go viral whenever you want, Ross?
Yeah.
But they didn't do that. They absolutely saw it as this incredibly fortunate thing that happened to us that we needed to capitalize on by investing appropriately in marketing. And that's why we did our first TV ads last year, why we did our first outdoor campaigns, why we did a mural in Camden, and various other things that ultimately required investment, but that gave the business the momentum that is now paying dividends, as is so often the case with marketing investment, you know, a year, 2 years down the line.
And I think why I love it so much from our point of view is it's that real focus on community and fans, and very much the kind of organic and fan-driven engagement on TikTok, for example. So yeah, I'm a big fan of you being the poster child for that.
I need to tell you, our fans are the most incredible people, and I was reminded of this the other week. So we recently did an interactive billboard in central London, where we basically brought one of our billboards to life, real hands reaching out of it and giving out little moons and merch and all that kind of thing. And it was sort of designed as a bit of a PR thing and sort of a sampling opportunity. It's a bit about social buzz. It was just one of those good things to do that you knew good things would come off, even if it was doing multiple things at once. But the thing that really struck me was the lengths that our fans go to engage with the brand. So we had people who arrived at 6 a.m. even though they knew it didn't start until 8:30 a.m. just because they wanted the merch. I then got a letter from a 12-year-old girl in Belfast who had come over with her mum for the whole event, mainly to say how much she enjoyed it and to ask me when more flavours were going to be available in Northern Ireland. So our fans go to great lengths, and they're really valuable to us because, like, of course, there's all the Byron Sharp stuff that tells you it's your light buyers who are going to grow the business, and they are absolutely critical. But actually, your fans are often the people who make you the word of mouth hit and sustain you as that growth comes. So we look back on all of the things that we've done as a business before my time, as well as when I've been here, from our pop-up stores at Selfridges in Westfield, to the ice cream truck tour we did last year, to even the Luna Cinema partnership we're doing now, all of which are relatively modest in terms of reach, but are really brilliant at getting you goodwill with people who are going to talk to other people, and then who will then talk to other people, and hopefully we'll buy some packs and put them in a freezer for other people in the household to discover.
Yes.
Love it. I think I might need to talk to you offline about a fan challenge, because I argue that the Dr. Pepper fans that we work with and the Oreo fans are equally excitable. So maybe we need like a fan challenge at some
Fan
point.
off.
Absolutely love it.
So I'd love to ask you, what are you most proud of, either inside or outside work over the years?
So honestly, I think it is a bit of a personal one, but it's talking about the out and proud thing there. I'm most proud that I've managed to reconcile in my head being a gay man and being a successful marketer, because I found that really difficult. I'm being honest, for 10 years of my professional career. It does sound ridiculous, but there were honestly times when I thought the two were mutually exclusive, and it made me extremely unhappy. And getting to that place has unlocked a happier me in my personal life and in my professional life. It's made me a lot less worried about what people think of me. a lot more philosophical when I face setbacks. It makes me a lot more resilient. And, even though I experience anxiety like everyone does, because I do feel like it's part of the modern conditions, such as the widespread mental health challenge that it feels like our whole country is facing right now. But I'm not battling demons in the way that I was in my 20s. And so the whole thing is immeasurably more manageable as a result of that. So yeah, reconciling those two things. Of course, like I've done lots of things in my career that I look back on with fondness, and some great ads and some terrible ads, and some people who I've been lucky enough to work with who I'm so incredibly proud of, and all that. They're all so important to me. But yeah, on a personal level, the realization that I could be who I really am and still be really successful, in fact, because of who I am, not in spite of who I am, has been pretty transformative for me.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think before we move on to the slightly more quick fire, I just have one more, which is, can you talk about your focus for the next couple of years and perhaps what's exciting you in the industry?
So I think, my focus now is making Little Moons the kind of category phenomenon that people write case studies about for years to come. I know that sounds incredibly arrogant.
No, I
But
love
you've
it.
got to aim big, and I just honestly believe we've got this incredible transformative product and brand on our hands in a category that's been static for too long, and that's just hugely exciting. I've worked on brands and products in the past where you really have to dig deep to get excited because you feel like you're doing more of the same, or you're managing staying still. And I don't I don't thrive on that. I love either big growth challenges or big turnaround challenges. And I just think we've got this really exciting growth challenge ahead of us. And so I'm really excited about that. I am personally, because I'm choosing to see this as an opportunity rather than a huge challenge, quite excited about the HFSS legislation and some of the stuff that's happening in the category. For those who don't know, HFSS stands for high fat, salt, sugar products. The government are bringing in regulations to restrict promotional space, promotional mechanics, advertising on products like that. I don't agree with everything in the way that they're doing it, but I ultimately see the societal goals that they're trying to achieve. And I tend to see this as opportunity because a constraint can be incredibly helpful in making you think differently and shaking you up out of your usual pattern of what you do year in, year out. And working for a business that's more agile and entrepreneurial, I feel really confident we're going to do really well out of that challenge, actually, because we'll be able to act on our feet and do things a little bit quicker than some of our more behemoth-like competitors, shall we say, but we'll see. And then on a personal level, I'm getting married in a couple of months. So starting a life I didn't really think I'd have when I was younger is pretty exciting. And I'm at that point in the project management of the whole thing that I just want it to be over now. So
Well,
I'm excited about the aftermath.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
So we're going to move on to the final section of the podcast now. So I was going to say where we get a little bit more personal, but actually I feel like we've probably achieved that bit already. So tell us about your idea of a perfect weekend, and if you have any guilty pleasures.
So my favourite thing in the world is an early morning walk in Walpole Park in Ealing with my partner Ricky and our dog Maggie, and stopping off at a cafe called Pulp that we are both weirdly obsessed with, and just chatting away about everything and nothing, and getting annoyed that Maggie's recall is terrible. So I appreciate that's incredibly middle-aged. There isn't a huge amount to feel guilty about in there,
Absolutely
other than
not.
maybe the pastries that I probably consume a few too many of and that kind of thing. But I do think, and particularly, we'll talk about it in lockdown, dog walking was my savior. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And I actually I'm at that stage where I look forward to Sunday mornings and doing what I just said, which is crazy.
No, that's nice. It's nice. It's not a chore. I might be making a massive assumption here, Ross, based on your accent, possibly your name. Are there any Scottish delicacies that you miss?
How dare you know? You're quite right. I am indeed from Edinburgh. I am a complete cliche, so I kid you not, my fridge has an entire shelf dedicated to Iron Brew. I get it from Ocado. It's the only place you can get it. I'm probably on at least one can a day. I do think it's my touchstone for Scotland. The thing I really miss that I can't get down here is chippy sauce from Edinburgh. And anyone from Scotland will know this, but there are big dividing lines in Scotland from area to area as to what you'll get when you're offered salt and sauce in any different part of Scotland. You will not get the same thing. So very specifically chippy sauce in Edinburgh. It's kind of a blend of brown sauce and vinegar. You can buy the Iron Brew bottle in fish and chip shops. Must be tried to be believed. But yeah, I definitely miss that, and I do my best to make sure I will have a fish supper every time that I'm back up in it.
Quite right. And that was one thing because I lived in London for 10 years and it was stovies for me. Couldn't get
Yeah, I get
stovies
that.
anywhere. So over to you, Tamara.
Yeah. Do you have a bucket list, and what's still on it?
So I try not to have one, only because I am the kind of personality that's prone to obsess about achievement, as you've probably guessed from certain things I've said in this conversation. However, I really do want to do a Grand Designs-esque property project at some point in my life.
Nice.
I do spend my downtime on the tube, aimlessly browsing Rightmove and sending derelict properties to my partner, who needs to remind me that we don't have the money and the resources or the time to do any of this.
Apart from that, though.
Well, yeah. So I do, kind of at some point, I'm kind of obsessed with like transforming disused and derelict buildings into things that are of use to society at some point. So I would love to do it somehow. I mean, I'm not really interesting. When I was a kid, I wasn't really that practical a person, didn't really understand DIY. But as I've grown up, I've become increasingly self-sufficient, taught myself lots more things via YouTube. Still haven't really mastered plumbing, but I'm sort of determined to get there in the end. So I think if marketing ever turns out not to be the thing for me, then going and learning a few trades and getting into that kind of property development would be something I'd love to do.
And was that kind of one of the sort of things that you picked up during lockdown? Are there any other habits that you've got from lockdown?
A little bit in lockdown. I mean, honestly, when you're on gardening leave in lockdown, so I had 6 months of literally not being able to work. So you were structuring your time, talking to headhunters and practicing for interviews and stuff. And the rest of the time, I was either learning how to fit out the downstairs loo or dog walking. And, the thing that saved me was going on walks with our old dog, William, who sadly passed away last year. But having the structure of walking him twice a day, sticking a podcast in your ears, marching around Ealing's parks became really, really important to my mental health. And it's something I'm really protective over now, actually, because I'm back in a fairly stressful job. But any days that I'm fortunate enough to work from home, I've got an hour marked out in my diary in the middle of the day that I kind of know that even if I wanted to take the time back for meetings, Maggie, the dog that I'm now lucky enough to have, would literally be sitting next to me whining and scratching at my leg, demanding a walk at that time. So as much as it's for her, it's for me as well, to be honest. I think it's a real saving grace. And I mean, I could talk about dog ownership for hours, which I promise not to. But what I will say is, if you're thinking about it and you're in your 20s, don't do it, because you basically have to give up spontaneous fun. But if you're in your 30s, it is brilliant, because it gives you a fantastic excuse to be as middle-aged as you actually want to be and do all the things that are actually good for your well-being. So yeah, definitely get a dog when you've got to that age where you don't want to be in the club anymore.
Good tip. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to sort of answer? Or if you've got any closing thoughts, I'm going to give the platform over to you.
No, look, I would just say it's been such a privilege being asked to come on and talk to you both, and in particular to be given the opportunity to talk about being open about my identity and how that's helped me be better at work and not just life. Because I do think one of the LGBTQ people shouldn't have to come out and be really open and loud about this, because society shouldn't force that. But that's the reality of what we live in, and I'm very conscious that hopefully the more that particularly senior people in business can come out and talk publicly about their struggles, but how ultimately them being open and honest and bringing their full selves to work has been of benefit to their careers, not just to their personal life. Hopefully we'll create a better situation for the 21-year-olds just coming into the workplace for the first time and having to wrestle with that stuff now. So I'm really privileged. I really hope that it's helped even one or two people listening at home. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
You've been listening to Genuine Humans, brought to you by The Social Element. If you loved what you heard, remember to subscribe, or you can find out more at www.thesocialelement.agency.